I'm Indra,
And I'm Amanda.
and we'd like to welcome you to The Messy Middle Matters. Hey, Amanda, episode 2.
Episode 2. Well, this is a 4. 2.
I'll take whatever. Actually, that's a really good dovetail. Because, it's the definition. I was saying, we were talking about today about the definition of words, but definition of symbols also matters, right?
Right, the definition of all the things.
Yeah. All the things matter. But, so tell me, Amanda, tell me about a time or a situation where the definition of words have come up, and that's been really like a prickly situation for you, or like something that sticks in your mind.
Oh my God. Like every new hire onboarding I've ever done in my life, where you join a meeting and people are just saying acronyms and words that you've never heard before, very industry specific or company specific. And I'm just like, what is going on? And I'll write them all down and create a personal glossary. And on more than one occasion, it's become the crowdsourced company glossary. I'm just like, hey, I wrote down my notes. I published them here because I couldn't find one. And people have added to it of just oh yeah, these are words that not everybody knows or not everybody is familiar with because they haven't worked in this industry before. If you want a more specific example, the word or the term end to end has come to mind of just yeah, we're going to be done with end to end testing on this date. And I would ask a follow-up question end to end of what? And find out that it's not actually end to end of the entire user experience, right? It's end to end of only the part that our team worked on. And it's okay, that is end to end, but it's a different definition of end to end. So let's get to the bottom of this. Let's be clear on when we say end to end, what do we all mean?
100%. And sometimes it's real words you would find in the real world. It feels, and this is not the intention, but the word that sometimes you feel like you're being gaslit. They're not trying to gaslight you. It's just that they've taken a term that means something everywhere else and in the definition, or maybe something else in other companies that are even in the same industry. But here it means this, and knowing what people mean. So I think that, you and I have often been in this scenario. I think you said it really well the other day. It was so I know what those words mean individually, but when you put them together and in this particular context, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Because the struggle is real. And you're talking about creating glossaries. I was at one of my more recent roles, I created a glossary doing the same thing. I think it's my best practice, right? I think that comes from our project management background. I still remember studying for my PMBOK and whatever. We don't need to, that's an acronym you don't need to worry about, folks. But looking at that and yeah, collecting definitions is the best practice that I've used over and over again. And in that recent role, I'm hey, folks, created this sheet or a wiki. I think it was a sheet. Wikis there were a whole nother problem. We're not going to go into that. But created a sheet with all my definitions. Oh, we already have one. I'm I found it. I'm it has 5 words. And that was last updated and whatever. And it is not complete. Take a look at mine and I said it gently and nicely. I'm take a look at mine. Take a look at this. I'm oh, yours is better. I'm I know. Because I also think that when you and I talk about words and when we're trying to find things, we're not just doing it. You modeled a perfect example right there. We're not just doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for everyone, because if there isn't shared understanding of what the words mean in this context, on this project, on this day, everything can go sideways. Everything can go sideways so fast.
Yeah. Something that you said triggered something for me, of real world words, right? I just started a pottery throwing class.
Yeah.
And I walked in first day, never having touched clay before.
Mm-hmm.
And there were other people in my class who have taken a class before, who have been, exposed to the art and know all the meanings of the words.
Yeah.
So when the instructor was okay, you're going to wedge your clay, I'm what does that mean? Because wedge is my understanding of my understanding of wedge is very different from what wedging clay in the art of ceramics means. Wedging clay is like essentially like kneading clay like dough to get all the air bubbles out, like prepping the clay
Yep,
for
yep.
throwing on the wheel. And like
Yeah.
throwing, right? Throw like if you don't know anything about pottery, right?
You might be trying
What
to
do you
pitch
think
it off
throwing
across the.
means?
I know that you wouldn't do that. Of course, we can
Right.
use context clues to be like that. I don't think that's what they're trying to tell me to do. Is to throw play at each other.
Right. So then it was just like, okay, can we all take a step back and like, yes, this is a beginner class. And like, you know, teachers learn how to teach, right? Like
Right.
there are things that in their head that they just assume that everybody knows or they understand the context of what that definition means.
Yeah.
And it's just like, no, I don't know what wedge means in clay. I don't know what throwing means in clay. Like, I don't know what any of these words means. Trimming, we did trimming yesterday. And I'm like, okay, I think I could guess what trimming is, but like actually seeing what trimming was, I was like, that is not what I thought we'd be doing today.
Well, but it's interesting. Like you and I are talking about creating like shared vocabularies and shared knowledge repositories and shared whatever. And if those terms are not familiar to folks, please let us know, because what we're going to actually be doing with this podcast is creating a website, a component of which will be a glossary, so that if we're throwing out terms, you guys can look at it. So we have, if you go to the messymiddle.com/feedback, she should find a Google form where you can send us feedback on what might be useful for us to include. Um, but like, so we're talking about making sure that vocabulary, like language, isn't a barrier, right? And that people can come together. And I think that what we probably will talk about like is global teams, which is another topic of conversation, right? But I think that there's also industries and organizations that really use language to exclude. They use language as like a gating factor for making sure that the people in power stay in power, or the cool kids stay the cool kids, or whatever it might be. Like the one that comes to mind. So years and years ago, for folks who don't know, I used to work at TD Ameritrade, and there was a moment in time where I thought I was going to sit for my Series 7 exam, which is like the most fundamental exam for becoming a certified financial services professional. So I was studying for that, and I was looking for it, looking through the materials. And the thing that I figured out very, very quickly was, oh my gosh, Indra, you need to pretend like you don't know the definition of any word ever, ever, and figure out what the word means here. Like I should have grabbed it. I have one on my shelf actually, but like tombstones. What is a tombstone in financial services? Like it started off, if I'm remembering it correctly, I'm sure some financial services person is going to be like, Andrea, you got that mostly right, but not quite. But tombstones are these like commemorative, like it probably started off as like something hard, like it probably started off as stone, right? But it can be plaques, it can be all sorts of different things that people can put on their desk to commemorate the issuing of a stock, right? As an example of a tombstone.
What?
There are
When
all
you
these
said
words.
tombstone, I was like, RIP, here lies like so and so.
No, but like it's really like it's a commemoration plaque, right? Is probably the best way to do it. But like they use all these words to it can be divisive. Like the legal industry's also got a lot of words. Like ever try and understand a legal document? Good lord. Like it's like, what do you mean by that word? I know what that word means in the rest of the world, but what do you mean? So, but I think that if we're talking about doing work really effectively, and if we're talking about making sure that people can work well, and that there's good flow and projects can get done, you can get out of that messy middle. And I think we're going to go define that definition again in a second, just to make sure everyone has that shared understanding of that term. But like, if you really want to move fast, and you really want to be inclusive, and you really want to get your work done quickly and effectively, you have to have that shared vocabulary. And the more exclusionary you are, the more hurdles you're going to actually wind up finding for getting stuff done. And you're a get stuff doneer, Amanda, right?
Right, I'm gonna get stuff done. Yeah, like
Yeah.
you kept on saying, or we kept on saying, shared understanding, right?
Yeah.
Like I think we, in order to set teams, companies, whatever, the people up for success for the thing, there needs to be some kind of level setting exercise up front. And like part of that is, do we all understand what's going on, how we're talking about things, what these words mean, so that going forward we're not just stuck in an unnecessary loop of arguing over a definition of end-to-end testing, right? Like, for example.
100%. Like, and it's, and that's so key at the beginning of something. Like, and everyone's always like the beginning of something, everyone's got all the energy in the world. They want to get it done. They want to do it fast. Like, it's just like, that's so very American of us, right? Like, I want to get stuff done. I want to do it. Yes, yes, yes. Rah, rah, rah. And, when you start bringing up something like, getting a glossary together or getting a roles and responsibilities matrix together, which we could talk about another day. But if you start talking about, but both of those are tools for that shared understanding. What people don't recognize, they think that you're putting a speed bump and you're slowing their progress, but you're doing the slow down to speed up. Let's slow down. Let's define this so that we don't have to discuss literally every day. What do we mean by end to end? Or we put a qualifier in end to end of this, end to end of that, end to end of like whatever. Like I'm always like, can I have a qualifier with the word design? My favorite word that gets used by everyone. Is that a architecture design? Is that a process design? Is that a UX design? Is that a UI design? Is that a business design? Design.
Because
But
everything is design.
everything is
Design encompasses so many things.
so many things, but it's a massive umbrella category. But for each person, it's like it's my thing. Like it's design in my world. Like I get that, but you're at a table with a lot of different people. So
Yeah.
um
I mean, you and I ask each other the question of like using design as an example.
mhm.
Design. Design of what?
Design of what, why, and by whom. Like just like I'm not saying no. I just want to understand because I always say I'm very simple. I'm very simple. If I can understand it, anyone can understand it. I just need you to simplify it for me. Like, can you explain to me what you mean by
Right.
like,
Explain like I'm five,
please?
please.
And it's not that I couldn't jump to a conclusion, but I would be jumping to a conclusion. And what is that? Like, you're likely to get it wrong, or at least part of it. But so back to not everyone will have listened to the first episode. If they listen to the first episode, they may not have paid attention to it. They may not remember it. It's totally fine. But in an effort to bring everyone into that shared understanding, Amanda, do you mind refreshing everyone on our definition of the messy middle? I know you're going to be reading it off our glossary. Make sure we get it all. Like we wordsmithed it. So yeah.
Yeah, I will. So, the messy middle is where resilience, creativity, and adaptability are most needed and where they are often tested the hardest. It's the phase where people and teams either break down or break through. When approached with intention, support, and the right frameworks, the messy middle can become a time of deep transformation rather than just struggle. The goal isn't to avoid the messy middle, it's to navigate it with tools, strategies, and communities that make it more manageable, meaningful, and ultimately successful.
Love it. As you're reading it in this context and based on like what we were just chatting about, the thing that jumps out to me right now is the avoid the messy middle. What I find all too often and is that people are afraid that everyone else knows what that term means and that they're the only one in that meeting, call, organization, team that does not know what that word means. And it's 9 times out of 10 I'm like, you and I are very good at like, hey, out loud for everyone on the call, can you just do me a quick favor and define what that is?
Right. Just so that we all understand here. And oh, by the way, I'm going to write that down too
I'm gonna
and
write that
include it in
down.
the meeting
I'm gonna
notes.
write that down. It's just me. It's just me. I'm the only one who doesn't understand. I totally get it. I might be the I used to say I might be the only one who doesn't understand, right? But can you just do me a quick favor? Because I want to make sure I'm tracking you 100%, right? And then what happens is one of two things or both things can happen. Um, Somebody quietly DMs me on the side, like, "Oh my God, thank God," because I had no idea what they were talking about. I'm like, okay, cool. It's fine. It's fine. Um, and that's why I do what I do. Or like people literally say it on the call, like, "Oh, that's really useful because like I was thinking of this definition that we used on this last project. You mean that here?" And then that triggers a new conversation to clarify the thing that you're talking about and that you're working on.
Yeah, the DM on the side, the quiet DM of just like, oh my God, thank you so much, has happened so many times in my career because I'm always the one who's like, I don't know what that means. Or maybe I do know what that means, but like, To clarify for everybody here, like I'm gonna interrupt you. I'm gonna stop you. Like, can we pause and talk about like what do you mean by that word so
Yeah.
that everyone's on the same page?
Yeah. And I bet you that in our listeners, like we've got people who are, they're like, oh, I do that too. I'm like, welcome to the messy middle. That's actually one like good, that's probably a good signpost to say, oh, like you live in the messy middle too. Great. You may not be in project management or operations manager, or whatever. Like a lot of people wind up in the messy middle because they're the ones who are trying to help to create some sort of clarity. And words are the first place to start. Like my therapist always says to me, she's like, words are slippery. What do you mean by that? Like, I'm like, great, let's talk about it. Like let's get into that because it's and they change, especially in this world. Goodness gracious, the words are changing, like the definitions of words and the meanings of words are changing. Like I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and she's going through an interview process right now. And she said, yeah, the company is defining its like both of the people that she spoke with, they said they both of them said that the company is conservative. I'm like, oh, what does that mean right now? Like, are they risk averse and they don't want a lot of change? Like in this world, in this day, at this moment, and let's acknowledge the world that we live in right now. We live in a lot of political stuff right now. Like I suspect after I took a beat, like my first brain went to like for a second, my brain went to like literal politics, like governmental politics. But
Yeah,
wait, hold on.
same.
But I'm like, maybe they did mean that, but maybe they're like, oh, they're just risk averse and they want to test and learn before they actually make a change to that particular thing. Like there's lots of definitions to stuff. So when she speaks to them next, if she has a chance to speak with them, like defining the word conservative, like what does that mean in the context of this role and the way that you were using it? Like, is it that you're cautious? Is it that you're, like you want to make sure that everything has a particular political ideology? I don't think it's that one, but like, like what do you mean by that? Like it's really useful to understand.
Yeah, when you said that words change, or the meanings of words change, what came to mind was just like an idiom that you and I
Mm.
have experienced or used, right? Out of pocket. So out
Mm.
of pocket, right? For me, at least, I'll go on vacation and I'll be like, "Hey guys, I'm gonna be out of pocket from this day to this day." Out of pocket means something totally different today. Like
For the kids, the
for the
kids out of
kids,
pocket
the
is something
youngs.
altogether different. But
Hmm.
but it's so funny. Like some of those idioms and those terms and like turns of phrases or whatever they might be, like they don't hold true, or people don't understand the origin and like ping me. Like what does I remember when ping me started, but like what does ping me mean to somebody who's just entered into the workplace? Like it means nothing. Like for those of you. So actually, let's define these words. We promise you to define. I'll start with ping. Ping was like back in the day when messaging, like instant messaging was like brand new. You could just like quickly shoot somebody as something and their computer would ping. So that's the first that I remember pinging being like, and I'm sure it goes to military and sonar and whatever and pinging a submarine. Like I just have a sneaking suspicion since so much of our technology actually started in the military. Um, so like that's what that means. Amanda, let's talk about out of pocket and those two definitions because they are two completely different things.
Right. Out of pocket, like for me, it's like I'm unreachable. Like I'm
Yeah.
out of like the pocket of work.
Your
I'm out
phone
of
is
it.
not in your pocket. It's not
Yeah.
there.
Right. Out of pocket. Today, I think it means just like going wild, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna be out of pocket for a few days and I'm like gonna go party and like go do crazy
Go
things.
wild. Like they're
Yeah.
wild or out of control or like
Out of
that
control.
was out of pocket. Like, oh my God, that was so totally out of pocket.
Right. That was out of pocket. And it's just like, well, if I told the youngs that I was going out of pocket, they're like, wait, you're gonna go party for a
Mhm.
week? No, 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 I'm gonna be out of pocket. Like I am unreachable. I am on vacation. I'm not gonna go party. I'm gonna be sitting on a beach, like without my phone. That's what I meant by out of pocket.
Well, and then you throw in so anyone who knows me knows that I love the tickety talk. I love TikTok.
Mhm.
Some of my favorite videos that come across, and they come every once in a while, are from teachers, usually of middle school, who are teaching us slang. Like, what does that word mean? And they're fun. Or like we're watching any of the videos where like a parent, whether they're a millennial or a Gen Xer, usually like one of those two, and their kids like defining words, and like they're like both guessing at what the word must mean, like in like from each generation's slang. It changes all the time, and I think that that's where um I think it's very natural to get attached and precious about these things. Like, no, but that's what the word means, because, you know, that's what we're judged on. Like, for all of our academic careers, like, there was either right or wrong. Like, there was nothing in between. Like, and if you didn't get it right, like, you would have a big problem, right? But I think that, you know, in the real world amongst people, especially at work, when people are coming from so many different lived experiences, especially when we're talking about global teams with English as a second language, we'll talk about that, I think, next. But like, it's really important to be generous, meet people where they are. And if they do have a different definition, and that word is a reserved word in your organization, a reserved word means like, this word always means this thing in this company. I know it means something somewhere else and it's completely different, but this is a reverse no, I can't even say the word again. It's totally jumped down my right. It's a reserved word. Oh, tongue twisting. We've all been there. Say the word too many times and you'll lose it. But that's a word that you just need to understand that here, this is what the word means. And yes, when you leave that, you go hang out with your friends at the bar. You're even communing with your colleagues on your way home on public transit or whatever it might be. You know, you can use the word in a different context in a different way, but here it means this very, very clear thing, and we just all need to get on board. You know, that's yeah, reserved
Yeah,
words.
and it's not just words, right? It's acronyms or
Mm.
abbreviations. There are so many acronyms in so many industries that like if you take, I can't even think of an example right now, but if you take the same acronym and you ask people in different industries what that means, you'll get so many different answers of like what do the letters stand for?
100%. 100%. Like I'm sure we'll think of an acronym somewhere along the way, because like there are so many. Like, what does that mean here in this scenario? And the other thing, like I was just mentioning, and I know that you've had some new experience working with international global teams. When you're working with global teams, so like I think that where I cut my teeth the hardest on this was at we were a global organization, right? We had, and I was part of the technology team, and our teams were based in our primary locations. There are more than that, but the primary locations, we had New York, we had San Francisco. Those already have two different sets of vocabulary, but like, let's just treat the US as one for the simplicity of things. We can work out our stuff in the US. We had people in Latin America. We had people in the Middle East. We had people in Europe. We had people in Asia. We had people in India. And the reality of that, like, the thing that I learned there was as fun, and it can be fun. It can be fun to find that perfect word, that perfect SAT word that, you know, like that nails this thing. And it's the kind of word that not everyone has, but it's just so perfect. Like there's, oh gosh, there was, oh, I'll give you an SAT word that like I was working with someone who was a designer, and his favorite thing, he was very particular. He was very intelligent and he wielded his intelligence a fair bit. And one of the words that he would always use is verisimilitude.
What does that mean?
Verisimilitude. It is the perfect word for what he's tried to explain. And every once in a while I will use it because it's perfect. And I'll tell people what I mean by it just in case it slips out of my mouth. Verisimilitude. So the context that in which we were using this. So we were designing interfaces for financial services systems, right? So there's lots of numbers and lots of data. And one of the things that when you're working within a financial services organization, getting access to real data, exceptionally hard, right? Because of all the security reasons you might be able to imagine. But a designer needs to understand what the real data might look like. So if I'm designing a screen that's for a couple of $1,000 versus $100,000 versus $1 million versus $1 billion versus $1 trillion, that field needs to be a whole bunch of different sizes depending on how long that number is. And so whenever he would flow this real data into these screens, they would look they would look as if they were representative of reality. They were representative of what a manager, a financial person. I won't go into specifics. I don't want that project to get outed or whatever. But like the user of that particular system, it was representative of what they would see in real life when they were looking at real data. That was verisimilitude. This screen is fake. But because I've flowed in data that is realistic, there is verisimilitude between this mock up and what somebody will see in the real world. Verisimilitude. A lovely, beautiful word that describes what it took me, I don't know how many minutes to explain to you right now, but not useful if no one knows what the word verisimilitude means.
Oh, totally. And like as you said, verisimilitude, and like it encompassed this beautiful definition that you just went through, right? I feel like a lot of German words are like this.
They can be. Oh, I love a good Schadenfreude, but
Same.
but it's true, right? And I could have probably done that a lot more concisely, being like, oh, it's realistic, but like realistic in what way? Like it's very like it's so like but if you do find yourself in an environment where you need to use the verisimilitude and your team is global, give them the definition and don't assume that they remember it every time. Be like, hey, this says verisimilitude. Remember, it looks lifelike. You don't need to go through the full long definition. You can go to the shorthand and be like, hey, it looks like realistic. Like, yeah, cool.
Well, and I mean, like you said, global, but like we're not global, and like English is our first language, and I didn't know what verisimilitude meant.
Who does? Who
Right? It's an
does?
SAT word.
And I got another job where somebody was like, they're like, oh, you'll be implicated in this. And I was just like, it was my third day of work. I was like, oh. Because I'm thinking the way that Amanda, when you hear the word implicated, what's the first thing comes to mind?
You're blamed.
Blamed. I feel like I'm going to jail. Like getting
Yeah.
sued.
There's a negative connotation to the word implicated.
Implicated. And I had to ask, I didn't ask him because I knew the person and I was like, this is not like, looked it up. Like I'm going to say the fifth definition of the word implicated means involved in. I'm like, oh,
Oh, why
but
didn't you
there's
just say that?
but there's a connotation, right? The connotation overrules the dictionary definition of the fifth definition of that word. And I had to go around asking people in the organization. I found my safe person. I'm like, hey, by the way, like such and such use this word, and I'm like, is that like a term in this company, a term within this team, within this craft? Like, what's the story here? Like, um, and he's like, no, that's a person that's unique to that person. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I will then with everybody else, the word means this, but with them, it means that. Like, got it. Check.
Yeah.
I'll add as my personal knowledge repository. That's not going to be on my common one because it's one person, right? But like, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're on this topic of connotations, right? Because the example that came to mind was like there's a difference between a cottage in the woods and a cabin in the woods and a shack in the woods, right? Like your imagery when you hear those three words, even though they're pretty much the same thing, like a small little house in the woods, totally different.
100%. And I think that that's, where we need to be careful. We need to check to see if everyone understands it. Like you and I are very well versed in agile. For those of you who are not in program project management or haven't exposed to agile is a way of making projects happen. So it's a framework for helping to make projects get done. And one of the things that's where they use the word shared understanding a lot, which we've used already so far. But that makes sense. Oh, we're sharing understanding. Like that makes sense. But one of the things that they do, and I just want to be explicit about this, we talked about this, but we haven't been explicit. One of the things that they advocate for in Agile is write it down. Write it down, because when you write it down, you can look at it and see it objective. Like, oh, I see how that, like, because the brain is tricky. The brain is tricky. We can fool ourselves into the fact that we said something that we didn't say, right? Or vice versa, right? Write it down, have everyone look at it, and they'll be like, oh, when you were talking, I thought I understood what you were saying. But now that you wrote it down, I can see we're talking about something different. And then you can literally get to a definition that you both have for the thing, whether it's a visual representation or a word or whatever, like you get that thing.
Yeah, and writing it down, it's It's useful. This is why we send out meeting notes, right? It's like we're writing it down, and like
Uh-huh.
often if there's something really important that needs to be captured or shared or like referenced later, I'll stop and be like, "Hey, I'm taking this note. I'm going to publish this like in our wiki or whatever. Just to be clear, this is what I'm writing. Does everybody agree that this is what we've all, agreed to and like understand?"
Yeah. And right. And the thing is, writing things down is scary for people. Like that's the other thing that we need to acknowledge. And it might be scary for anyone who's listening too. Like writing something down, it feels so if the feelings that come up that I like I've had in the past, sometimes even when I'm doing it now, like who's going to judge me? Who's going to tell me I'm wrong? Who's going to like correct my spelling? Who's going to like correct my grammar? Who's going to make fun of the font that I use for writing it down or my handwriting? Like all these things come through and so I want to honor that. Like I want to acknowledge that because, that's very real. And it can feel embarrassing. And so, if you're in a situation where you're in the messy middle, but you're either one of those things come up or you're pretty junior in the organization and you can't put your foot forward or whatever it might be, find your safe person who can actually write that down for you, get those reactions, whatever it might be. Like find your buddies,
Yeah.
because I think sticking your head in the sand is not going to fix the messy middle of like vocabulary and shared understanding.
Yeah. And writing it down, it's scary because it makes it real. Not to say that like the words you say out loud aren't real,
Yeah.
but like writing it down makes it feel more real of just like, oh, this artifact exists now. And it's
Yeah.
something that like I can see on paper and like it's for posterity, right?
Yes, there's a sense of permanence. Like it was this is part of why I started. It's why I actually started using post-its. I've always got to post it. I've always got to post it in a Sharpie, right? Of course, Amanda's got hers too, for those of you who are just listening. But and like I couldn't get people to commit to dates on a project. So I created a calendar on the wall and I put post-its that we could move onto different dates. I'm like, it's just a post-it, we can move it. Like
Right.
it's not the before times. Like we live in a digital world. We can move anything. You shouldn't always move something because you can, but like you can move it. You can move it, you can change it, you can refine it. And like these things are living documents. These are living definitions. Like they're not stuck forever unless it's that reserved word because for regulatory reasons or whatever, like this is only like this is there and it's locked and you don't have any choice in it because FINRA, which is one of the financial regulators, tells you that this is what that word means. You can change it. You can change it. You can evolve, and you just work with your team to do that. So, there's so many other things that we can talk about, but you and I have committed to the fact that we're going to keep these podcasts tight. We're going to
Yeah.
keep them tight. There are so many other interesting things that we can talk about on this. Like I've got like 500 other things that we can spider on. Um, so I hopefully, everyone got some sort of value out of this, maybe some validation, maybe something they hadn't realized. But Amanda, I'm really grateful that you and I were able to get together for this conversation about words. I know we're going to continue the words and defining things probably on every episode. They'll be like this word that we're defining and that word we're defining. Any
Well, we're
last
going to
thought?
be writing down the definitions.
We're writing them down. We won't write down everything in this one because we're using a lot of different examples, but we're using something that we're going to use regularly. We promise we're going to write it down. This was like a little bit of a dictionary conversation, but we will make sure any words that we use throughout the Messy Middle podcast are documented in our glossary so that everyone has them. I think we'll do a definition for shared understanding is a good example of something just defining that just a little bit more clearly and some other things. So
Shared understanding of what shared understanding means.
facts. Facts. It matters. It matters. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that you'll join us next time on the Messy Middle Matters, where we're going to be talking about not being valued by your organization. How do you realize that it's happening and what do you do? So thank you everyone. Be well, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.